A former MP is speaking up about her time in the House of Commons, and it wasn't great. Celina Caesar-Chavannes was elected to represent Whitby in the 2015 federal election for the Liberals. She was viewed as a rising star in that party. She went on to become the parliamentary secretary to Prime Minister Trudeau. But she had a very public falling out with the Prime Minister, and she ended her term in Ottawa sitting as an independent. In fact, early excerpts from her new book, Can You Hear Me Now? How I Found My Voice and Learned to Live with Passion and Purpose, that book comes out tomorrow. She chronicles, among many things, the inner workings of her life in politics in the Prime Minister's office, how she alleges she and the Prime Minister had a shouting match, a stare down, and her own struggles with mental health. But overall, it argues that she believes politics must be done truly differently. How? Let's find out. Joining me now is the author of Can You Hear Me Now, the former Liberal MP, Celina Caesar-Chavannes. Great to have you. It's always good to have you on the program. Sort of weird to still say you're a former MP. Before we get to the book, and the book is a powerful exploration, sometimes indictment of politics. Do you miss it ever?
I do. It's actually in the blood. It's in the bloodstream, and once you get bit, that's it. You're stuck.
Yeah, the book is a bit of it's one of those awakening books, right? I want politics to be this way. You get involved, you go to almost the highest levels, and then you say, no, it's got to be done differently. How did the reality differ from your expectations?
Well, you remember, Evan, when we signed up in 2014, 2015 for the Liberal Party, their platform was about open, transparent, government done differently, bolder, diversity, feminism. It seemed like everything that I wanted, and I bought that product. And I tried to sell that product to the people of Whitby, understanding that on those doorsteps, they were trusting me with their vote. And, you know, there were a few things that really didn't materialize towards the end of that four-year administration. And I couldn't reconcile just sort of putting my values aside and my principles around certain issues and then staying with something that I knew really wasn't a fit.
What was the breaking point for you?
I think the breaking point was really around issues like mandatory minimums, repealing mandatory minimums. When we actually legalized marijuana, there wasn't an appetite for expunging those records of individuals who had pre-existing charges, and I just thought that was really unfair to communities that needed it the most, and that was sort of the starting of the breaking point around the policies that I really wanted to see the government actually fulfill that they had promised that they were going to do.
Yeah, and it's fascinating. I mean, you write about in the book the control of junior staffers had over MPs in that environment, but you had access to the Prime Minister. Well, I guess you thought you might have access as parliamentary secretary to the Prime Minister. To make that change, what happened? How do you get to that level where you're that high up and you still feel like you don't have a voice?
Well, it's not a matter of feeling I didn't have a voice. It actually is the reality of the situation. So I describe in the book, especially as parliamentary secretary to the Prime Minister, our first meeting in which I told him very frankly that I didn't want to be tokenized within the government. I didn't want to fill any gender or racial gaps he may have had within in his administration. And clearly there's evidence that the only events that I really attended, especially on an international level, were related to Black events. Right. And there wasn't that opportunity to have the conversation that was needed around strategy, around business, around how to make the policy better or policies better.
Yeah, and it's fascinating. Here we are at the beginning of Black History Month, and it's important, and certainly the conversation has shifted post George Floyd. Those are critical issues. But you also don't want to be the only issues, and that's what you talk about with the tokenism. I think, and when that breaking, and I know you've talked about this, but I think we should talk about it. You almost had a screaming match with the Prime Minister at the end. What happened?
Well, I told the Prime Minister that I was not intending to run again, and it was a very cordial call, a courtesy call, to let him know that I was not running again. It happened to be on the same day that Honorable Jody Wilson-Raybould had resigned from cabinet, and that conversation didn't sit well with the Prime Minister. It was met with a lot of animosity towards me leaving at a time when he was perceived to have two powerful women of color leave his administration at the same time, and he wasn't happy with it. And I wasn't happy with the tone that he was using with me either. Well,
the words, I mean, that's been very controversial. This is a fascinating book about your personal journey, mental health, about getting into politics. But as people will read this book, Celina, how does politics have to change? Like we cover it on this program every day. I'm very intrigued. If you said, okay, here's my fix, what needs to be fixed?
Well, I think we have to look a little bit outside of politics. When I wrote this book, I wanted people to think about relationships differently, think about systems differently, think about their community differently, but think about themselves differently and how they operate within these systems. And when we think about our democracy as the center of the most central point of our country, the way in which we exert power that the people have to sway political will can't happen every 4 years. We have to hold our governments account in between those 4 years. We have to make sure that we're not just using our vote, but using our voice as well to make the changes that we want to see. I think Canadians are very powerful in terms of doing that. And I want to see that exercised more. If this past year didn't teach us that, I don't know what will.
Well, I could tell you, we hear you now. Can you hear me now? The author of the new book. Celina Caesar-Chavannes, it's great to have you back on the program. I know this will not be the last time, and we'll keep listening, and we always appreciate you taking the time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Evan. I appreciate it.
And never say never. She may run again sometime.